Chapter 1. The intervention nobody asked for. Rachell Mairin loved her grandparents' house for the same reason she avoided it when she was already overwhelmed. It had a way of stripping things down to their essentials. The house smelled like black tea, lemon biscuits, and furniture polish. It always did. The walls were crowded with framed photographs. Weddings, graduations, holidays, each one quietly testifying that love, when done right, lasted. Rachel had grown up absorbing those images like gospel. They were the reason she refused to settle. They were also the reason she was so very tired. She sat at the small round kitchen table with her mother and grandmother, her coat draped over the back of her chair, her phone face down beside her cup. The tea had gone lukewarm, forgotten somewhere between her second sigh and her fourth frustrated rant. "I'm just saying," Rachel said, rubbing her forehead. "I don't think it's unreasonable to want someone who doesn't treat dinner like a down payment." Her mother, Elaine, winced sympathetically. "It's not unreasonable. It's exhausting," Rachel continued. "The apps, the games, the pretending people aren't disappointed when you don't put out by date 3. Like my time, my company, my affection are things you earn with a receipt." Her grandmother, Margaret, reached across the table and squeezed Rachel's hand. Her grip was warm and firm, the way it always had been. "You're not wrong to want more," she said gently. "The world may move faster now, but that doesn't mean it's wiser." Rachel let out a long breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. "Sometimes I wonder if it's just not worth it. Maybe people like me missed the window. Maybe men don't stay when things get hard anymore." The words surprised her as they left her mouth. They felt too honest, too close to something she usually kept under control. Her mother's expression softened. "Oh, sweetheart." They talked for a while after that. Rachel recounted stories she usually told as jokes. The man who argued over splitting an appetizer to the cent. The one who complained she wasn't grateful enough. The one who thought emotional availability was a trap. Saying them aloud here, in this kitchen, stripped of humor, made her feel oddly validated. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't broken. She'd just been unlucky. She was just starting to settle into that fragile relief when laughter exploded from the living room. Not a chuckle. Not a polite snort. Laughter. Deep, wheezing, body-shaking laughter. Rachel, her mother, and her grandmother all turned toward the sound. Her grandfather sat in his recliner, the newspaper discarded in his lap, his cheeks flushed red and wet with tears. He laughed like something had finally snapped, like holding it in had become impossible. Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Henry," she called. "What on earth is so funny?" He wiped his face, still chuckling, and pushed himself up from the chair. On his way to the kitchen, he detoured to the fridge and grabbed a beer, twisting the cap off with practiced ease. "I've heard enough," he said, joining them at the table. "An hour of this, and I can't keep my mouth shut anymore." Rachel blinked. "About what?" He took a slow sip, then looked directly at her. "Rachel, I've always been proud of how smart you are." She smiled reflexively. "Thanks, Grandpa. But," he continued unfazed, "you're not very bright." The air vanished from the room. Rachel stared at him. Her mother gasped. Margaret made a sound halfway between a reprimand and a laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. "I'm sorry, what?" Rachel asked, certain she'd misheard. Henry leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "One word. Richard." Silence followed. Confused, thick silence. Rachel glanced between her mother and grandmother. "What about Richard?" Henry shook his head, chuckling again. "See? That right there. Proving my point. He's my friend," Rachel said automatically. Henry laughed harder. "Lord help me." Margaret's eyes sparkled despite herself. She knew that tone. He'd finally reached his limit. Henry took another drink, then leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locking onto Rachel's with unsettling clarity. "Kiddo," he said, voice steady now. "That boy's been in love with you since middle school. Everyone knows it but you." Rachel's stomach dropped. "That's not. He's helped you move how many times? Because he's my friend. He fixes things you don't even ask him to fix. He's handy. You cry to him about every idiot you date. That's what friends do." Henry shook his head slowly. "You're brilliant, Rachel. Truly. But you're about as bright as a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest." Margaret failed to hide her smile this time. Rachel felt heat rush to her face. "That's not fair." "No," Henry agreed. "What's not fair is stringing along a man who'd crawl through broken glass for you, while you complain there's no one willing to walk beside you." Her mouth opened, closed. Henry didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He's steady, reliable, loyal to a fault. He has his life together. He's everything you say you want, he said. And he's been standing in front of you for most of your life. Rachel's heart pounded. "I never asked him to." "I know," Henry interrupted. "That's the problem. You never asked. You never looked." The room felt unbearably small. "If you're not going to give him a chance," Henry continued, "then you need to let him go. Because he deserves someone who wants a family with him. Someone who chooses him." Rachel swallowed hard. "You've been selfish with your heart," he said quietly, "and careless with his." No one spoke. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the space where Rachel's certainty used to be. She stared down at her untouched tea, suddenly unsure how something so familiar had shifted into something terrifyingly new. Richard. The obvious thing. And for the first time in her life, Rachell Mairin wondered if the greatest risk she'd ever avoided was standing right in front of her all along. Chapter 2. Evidence is a cruel thing. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She lay in her childhood bedroom at her grandparents' house, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling shaped vaguely like a lightning bolt, replaying her grandfather's words until they lost their edges and became something worse. Plausible. Richard. The name felt heavier now, like someone had attached a meaning to it she couldn't peel off. She rolled onto her side and groaned softly, burying her face in the pillow. This was ridiculous. Her grandfather had always been dramatic, blunt to the point of cruelty when he thought it was deserved. He liked tidy solutions, Occam's razor in human form. Except, Henry was rarely wrong. That realization sat in her chest like a stone. Rachel squeezed her eyes shut and tried, unsuccessfully, to list all the reasons he was wrong. Richard was her friend. Had always been her friend. They met in 7th grade when he'd been assigned the locker next to hers. He'd helped her when her combination jammed, teased her about the number of books she carried, lent her a pen she never returned. Friendship. Pure and simple. Except, annoyingly, memory had started rearranging itself. She remembered the way he'd shown up to her high school graduation even though his own ceremony was on a different day. How he'd sat with her parents, laughing politely at her grandfather's jokes like he already belonged there. College. He'd driven 3 hours to help her move into her dorm freshman year, then done it again sophomore year, and again when she transferred apartments. She told herself he just liked road trips. "You're spiraling," she muttered to the ceiling. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Richard. Of course it was. She stared at the screen, pulse quickening, suddenly hyper-aware of how late it was. He rarely texted after 10 unless something was wrong. "Richard, your mom said you were visiting your grandparents. Everything okay?" She hesitated longer than necessary before replying. "Rachel, yeah, just tired. Long week." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Richard, wanna talk?" There it was. The familiar offer. The safety net she'd never questioned. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her head. "You cry to him about every idiot you date." Rachel swallowed. "Rachel. Not tonight. I'm gonna try to sleep." A pause. "Richard, okay. Tomorrow then. Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams." She set the phone face down like it had offended her. The next morning didn't improve things. Rachel sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee she forgot to drink, watching her grandparents move around each other with unconscious ease. Margaret handed Henry his toast without asking. Henry refilled her mug without comment. They existed in a rhythm built over decades. This was the bar she'd grown up with. This was why she'd walked away from men who treated her like a negotiation. And somehow she'd never thought to measure Richard against it. The drive home was quiet. Her mother let it be, mercifully, though she cast Rachel a few thoughtful glances at stoplights. By the time Rachel pulled into her apartment complex, her head hurt from thinking. She tried to distract herself with work, emails, reports, meetings, but her concentration fractured at the smallest provocation. Every buzz of her phone made her jump. Every lull invited memories she hadn't asked for. By late afternoon, she gave up and opened her photo app. She searched his name. The results were numerous. Group photos, holiday dinners, weddings where she was in a dress and Richard was beside her in a suit, looking inexplicably proud, like he'd had something to do with her existing. She stopped on one from 3 years ago, her 32nd birthday. She remembered that night. She'd complained about turning another year older while single. Richard had brought her favorite cake from the bakery across town, the one that always sold out. At the time, she'd laughed and said, "You're ridiculous." Now she noticed the way he was watching her blow out the candles. Not smiling broadly, just watching. Her stomach flipped. "No," she said aloud. "Nope, that's nothing." She locked her phone and stood up abruptly, pacing her living room. This was confirmation bias. Her grandfather had planted the idea, and now her brain was doing what brains did, rewriting history to fit a narrative. Except her brain was annoyingly thorough. She remembered the night she'd called Richard at 2 in the morning after a breakup that hadn't even been that serious. He'd shown up with takeout and a hoodie she liked because it was softer than hers. "You can keep it," he'd said when she teased him about it. She'd never given it back. Rachel sank onto the couch and covered her face with her hands. If Henry was right, if Richard had been in love with her this whole time, then she hadn't just been oblivious. She'd been cruel. The thought made her chest ache. Her phone rang. She flinched, then peeked at the screen. Richard. Again. She let it ring once, twice. On the 3rd ring, she answered before she could overthink it. "Hey," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Hey," he replied. "You okay?" "Yes. I mean fine. Why? You sound like you're about to lie to me." She huffed despite herself. "You know me too well." There was a smile in his voice when he said, "That tends to happen after 20 years. Her grip tightened on the phone. "What are you doing tonight?" he asked casually. "Nothing planned." Good. I was thinking we could grab dinner. No pressure. No pressure. The phrase landed differently now. Rachel hesitated just a beat too long. Rachel. Yeah, dinner's fine. They agreed on a time, place, the familiar Italian spot halfway between their apartments. After she hung up, Rachel stared at her reflection in the darkened TV screen. She looked the same. Same brown hair pulled into a loose knot. Same tired eyes. But something had shifted. Like a lens had been adjusted without her consent. At dinner, Richard was, unsurprisingly, Richard. He asked about her grandparents. He listened when she mentioned work. He remembered details she'd forgotten she'd told him. At one point, she laughed at something he said and caught him watching her again. That same quiet focus. This time, she didn't look away. Felt dangerous. Do I have something on my face? He asked, amused. No, she said quickly. I was just thinking. Oh, she smiled weakly. Don't worry. Not about you. He raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, but let it go. When they parted outside the restaurant, the moment stretched awkwardly. Not because he did anything different, but because she noticed everything. The way he waited, giving her space. The way he smiled like seeing her was enough. Drive safe, he said. You too. She watched him walk to his car. And for the first time in her life, Rachel Mairin wondered how many times she'd mistaken safety for absence of risk. Because suddenly, Richard didn't feel safe at all. He felt like the most terrifying possibility she'd ever ignored. Chapter 3, The Distance Experiment. Rachel decided very reasonably she thought that she needed space. Not the dramatic kind. Not a confrontation or a declaration or anything that would require her to say the words she was still afraid to test out loud. Just a little distance. A pause. Time to think without Richard's presence bending her thoughts in directions she wasn't ready to follow. It sounded sensible, mature, controlled. It lasted exactly 4 days. On day 1, she simply didn't text him first. This was unusual enough that she noticed every hour that passed without the familiar check-in. By lunch, she told herself she was reclaiming independence. By dinner, she was irritated that he hadn't noticed. He did notice, he just didn't pounce. That was the problem. On day 2, she declined his call. Can't talk tonight, she texted. Swamped, which was true. She was swamped with the sound of her own heartbeat every time his name lit up her screen. He replied with a thumbs up and, hope work eases up. I'm here if you need me. Always there. Rachel tossed her phone onto the couch like it had personally betrayed her. By day 3, she was actively avoiding places she might run into him. The coffee shop near her office. The hardware store he inexplicably loved. She ordered groceries instead of going to the market because she knew he shopped there on Wednesdays after work. She felt ridiculous. She also felt like she was holding her breath underwater. That night, she sat alone on her couch, half watching a show she didn't care about, when a scene involving a casual hookup devolved into a joke about expectations. The laugh track grated on her nerves. She muted the TV. Her thoughts slid, uninvited, back to Richard. He had never once made her feel like she owed him anything. Not dinner, not affection, not gratitude beyond what she offered freely. The realization landed with a thud. Stop, she told herself aloud. This is exactly why you needed space. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it for a full 10 seconds. Then she did. Richard. Random question. Do you still have my hoodie? Her chest tightened. Yes. It was folded neatly in the bottom drawer of her dresser. She washed it carefully. Never dried it on high heat. Rachel, yeah, I think so. Richard, okay. Just checking. No rush or anything. No rush. There it was again. That carefulness. That patience she'd always interpreted as ease, not restraint. She typed, deleted, typed again. Rachel, why? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Richard, cleaning out my closet. Realized I never got it back. If you want to keep it, that's fine too. If you want to keep it. Rachel stared at the words until they blurred. Rachel, I'll bring it by sometime. Richard, sounds good. The conversation ended there. No follow-up. No pressure. She hated how much that hurt. By day 4, the experiment was failing spectacularly. Rachel was distracted at work, snappier than usual, impatient with coworkers who had the audacity to need things from her. At lunch, her friend Maya studied her over a salad with the sharp suspicion of someone who had known her too long. Okay, Maya said finally. What's wrong? Nothing. Maya smiled thinly. Try again. Rachel sighed. I'm just thinking about some stuff. Is this about dating? Maya asked. Because if it is, I swear. No, Rachel interrupted. It's about not dating. Maya blinked. That's new. Rachel hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about her grandfather's intervention. Saying it out loud felt like giving it power. There's this person, she said carefully. Maya leaned in. There's always been this person. Rachel shot her a look. You're not helping. Maya shrugged. I'm just saying. You don't spiral over strangers. That afternoon, Rachel's car made a noise it had no business making. It was a grinding, metallic complaint that set her teeth on edge. She pulled into a parking lot, popped the hood, and stared at the engine like it might confess if she glared hard enough. She knew exactly who to call. She didn't. Instead, she called roadside assistance and waited 45 minutes for a man who barely looked at her before declaring it probably the belt and recommending a shop she didn't trust. She drove home slowly, gripping the wheel too tightly, furious at herself for feeling abandoned by a situation she'd orchestrated. When she got home, there was a text waiting. Richard, hey, you okay? Haven't heard from you much. She stared at the message until her eyes burned. This was supposed to make things clearer. Instead, it was making everything louder. Rachel, yeah, just busy. The lie tasted sour. There was a longer pause this time before he replied. Richard, okay, just okay. That night, Rachel dreamed of moving apartments again. Boxes everywhere. Furniture half assembled. She kept looking for Richard, knowing he'd be there, knowing he always was. But in the dream, he never showed up. She woke with her heart racing. The next day, day 5, the day she officially gave up pretending she was fine. She found herself driving toward his place without having consciously decided to. She noticed when she was 3 blocks away. Damn it, she muttered. But she didn't turn around. She parked across the street and sat there, hands in her lap, staring at his building. The hoodie was folded neatly in a reusable shopping bag on the passenger seat. This was about returning property, she told herself. Nothing else. She knocked. Richard opened the door looking surprised, and then carefully neutral. Hey, he said. Everything okay? There it was again. The first question he always asked. I brought your hoodie, she said, holding up the bag like proof of innocence. Oh, he stepped aside. You didn't have to come all the way over for that. I know. She stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence without unraveling everything. He took the bag, peered inside, then looked back at her. You want to come in? She hesitated. Yes, she wanted to say. No, she wanted to scream. I'm terrified, she wanted to confess. Just for a minute, she said instead. His apartment looked the same as it always had. Clean but lived in. Bookshelves she'd helped organize. Couch she'd napped on more than once. He set the hoodie on the back of a chair but didn't put it away. They stood there, the silence stretching in a way that felt new and sharp. You've been distant, Richard said finally. Not accusing. Just honest. Rachel swallowed. I know. Did I do something? No, she said quickly. Too quickly. No. This is me. He studied her for a long moment. Okay, he said. Do you want to tell me what's going on? The question hung between them. This was the moment. She felt it. The edge of something irreversible. She thought of her grandfather's voice. Let him go if you're not going to give him a chance. I don't know yet, she said softly. But I don't want to hurt you. Something flickered across his face. Surprise. Then something quieter. I know, he said. You never have. The words landed heavier than an accusation. Rachel realized then that distance hadn't protected either of them. It had just delayed the truth, and she was running out of room to pretend she didn't see it. Chapter 4, the worst date imaginable. Rachel told herself she needed perspective. Not avoidance. Not panic. Perspective. Which was how she ended up agreeing to a date with a man named Trevor who described himself, in his profile, as emotionally low maintenance and old school in the best ways. She had matched with him weeks ago, back when her emotional life hadn't been detonated by a 78-year-old man with a beer and no filter. Perspective, she reasoned, would remind her why she was frustrated in the first place. It would reset the scale. It would prove that whatever she was spiraling over with Richard was just confusion born of comfort. So on Friday night, she put on a navy wrap dress, low heels, and the practiced expression of a woman who knew how to make polite conversation without revealing too much of herself. She checked her reflection, squared her shoulders, and left her apartment determined to be normal. Trevor was already at the restaurant when she arrived. He stood when he saw her, smiled broadly, and leaned in a little too close for a first greeting. Wow, he said. You look even better than your pictures. Thanks, Rachel replied, stepping back just enough to reclaim her space. They sat. He waved down the server without asking her what she wanted to drink. Red wine for the lady, he said confidently. Rachel blinked. Actually, I was thinking. Trust me, he interrupted. It pairs well with everything here. Her jaw tightened, but she let it go. One drink wasn't a hill to die on. The conversation started innocently enough. Work, travel, the city. Trevor talked easily, expansively, with the comfortable arrogance of a man who had never had to wonder whether his voice belonged in a room. 10 minutes in, he asked, So what are you looking for, exactly? She took a measured sip of the wine she hadn't ordered. I'm not in a rush, but I'm interested in something real. Mutual respect. Partnership. He nodded, smiling like she just confirmed a theory. Right? So you're not into games? No, she said. Not at all. Good, he said. Neither am I. I like clarity. That sounded promising. It lasted until the appetizers arrived. Trevor leaned back in his chair, appraising her openly now, his gaze lingering in ways that made her skin itch. I'll be honest, he said. I'm a big believer in chemistry. If it's not there early, what's the point of investing time and money? There it was. Rachel set her fork down carefully. I think chemistry can grow. He laughed. Sure. But attraction is attraction. She met his eyes. Attraction isn't owed. His smile thinned. Of course not. But effort goes both ways. Her patience frayed. As dinner progressed, Trevor complained about his exes. Too needy, too emotional, too demanding. He bragged about not settling, and made an offhand comment about women who expect princess treatment without earning it. Rachel's appetite vanished. By dessert, he leaned in again, lowering his voice. So, my place is close. We could continue this there. No, she said, without hesitation. He blinked, clearly not accustomed to refusal. I'm just saying, it's been a good night. It has not, she replied calmly. His expression hardened. I paid for dinner. She stood, grabbing her purse. Then consider this the most expensive lesson you'll learn tonight. She left without waiting for a response. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a slap, and she welcomed it. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with anger, with exhaustion. She walked 2 blocks before stopping, leaning against a brick wall and closing her eyes. This was what she was trying to escape. Men who measured worth in transactions, who thought kindness came with conditions, who left her feeling like she had to defend her humanity instead of share it. Her phone buzzed. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Richard. She hesitated, then answered. Hey, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Hey, he replied. You okay? The question undid her. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. Can I come over? There was no pause, no question. Yeah, he said immediately. Of course. Want me to pick you up? I can drive. Okay, I'll put the kettle on. By the time she pulled into his driveway, the anger had drained out of her, leaving something raw behind. He opened the door before she knocked, his concern evident even as he tried not to crowd her. Rough night? He asked gently. She nodded, stepping inside. The familiar warmth wrapped around her like a balm. They sat on the couch, mugs of tea between them. She recounted the evening in clipped phrases, leaving out the worst of it because she didn't want his anger on her behalf. He listened, jaw tight, eyes dark. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, he said. You didn't deserve that. I know, she said. That's the problem. I always know. And somehow it keeps happening. He turned toward her fully. Not all men are like that. She laughed softly. I know. The words hung there, charged. She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the truth settle in her bones. Richard had never once made her feel small. He had never pushed, never implied, never treated her time, her affection, her presence as something to be earned or owed. She thought of Trevor's entitlement, of Richard's patience. The comparison wasn't even fair. I think, she said slowly, I've been confusing peace with boredom. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? She swallowed. I think I didn't realize how much noise I'd gotten used to. He studied her, something cautious entering his expression. Rachel, I'm not asking you to say anything, she said quickly. I just needed to be somewhere safe tonight. His shoulders eased. You are. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the door as he always did. Thank you, she said. Anytime. She paused, hand on the knob. Richard. Yeah. I don't want to go back on the apps. He smiled faintly. I wouldn't blame you. She nodded. Good night. As she drove home, Rachel realized something had shifted irrevocably. She wasn't running toward Richard. She was running out of excuses not to. And the worst date imaginable had finally shown her exactly what she'd been measuring everything against, without ever knowing it. Chapter 5, Reckoning with Fear. Rachel avoided her grandparents for exactly 1 week. It wasn't intentional at first. She told herself she was busy, that work had piled up, that emotional processing required solitude. But by the 4th unanswered call from her grandmother and the 5th unread text from her mother, she had to admit the truth. She was afraid of what they would see on her face, because something had changed, and she didn't yet know what to call it. Richard hadn't pushed after that night. He texted like normal, asked about her day, sent her a picture of a dog he'd passed on his run, reminded her to drink water when she complained about a headache. Nothing flirtatious, nothing charged, which somehow made everything worse. By Saturday morning, Rachel found herself standing in her kitchen, coffee growing cold in her hand, staring out the window with the unsettling sense that she was running out of time. Not in the dramatic, biological clock sense, but in the quieter, more dangerous way. The way where avoidance slowly calcified into damage. She grabbed her keys. Her grandmother answered the door with a knowing smile that suggested she'd been expecting this exact moment. Tea's already on, Margaret said, stepping aside. Of course it was. They sat at the same small kitchen table. The same chairs. The same china cups with faded blue flowers. Outside, spring pressed gently against the windows, all promise and insistence. Rachel wrapped her hands around her mug, grounding herself in the warmth. I'm not here for a lecture, she said preemptively. Margaret smiled. Then you're in luck. I'm not in the mood to give one. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Margaret spoke again. You look like someone who's been standing on the edge of something, she said. Not jumping, not walking away, just standing. Rachel exhaled. I don't know what I'm doing. That's rarely the real problem, her grandmother replied. Rachel looked up. Then what is? Margaret studied her carefully. You're afraid. The word landed softly. Precisely. Yes, Rachel admitted. Of him? Margaret asked. Rachel shook her head. No. Of me. Margaret's eyebrows lifted, inviting her to continue. Rachel stared into her tea. If I see him differently, if I let myself, it changes everything. There's no pretending after that. No going back. No, Margaret agreed. There isn't. What if I ruin it? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I try and fail and lose the one person who's always been there? Margaret reached across the table and took her hand. What if you don't try? She said gently. And lose him anyway? Rachel's throat tightened. I watched you grow up, Margaret continued. I watched you learn to walk, to argue, to leave. I watched you build a life you can stand on. But love, Rachel, love, isn't something you control with competence. Rachel laughed weakly. That's my entire problem. Margaret smiled. You think because you've chosen well everywhere else, love should follow the same rules. Rachel nodded slowly. But love, Margaret said, is a risk you choose again and again. Not because it's safe. Because it's worth it. Rachel thought of her grandparents, of the quiet rituals, the unspoken understanding. You and Grandpa make it look easy, she said. Margaret chuckled. We make it look earned. She squeezed Rachel's hand. Henry didn't fall in love with me because I was perfect. He fell in love because I showed up. I stayed. I chose him when it was inconvenient. Rachel swallowed. Richard has always stayed. Yes, Margaret said simply. And you've always kept one foot out the door. The truth of it stung. I'm not afraid he'll leave, Rachel admitted. I'm afraid he won't. Margaret tilted her head. Explain that to me. If he stays, if it's real, then there's no excuse, Rachel said. No blaming the apps. No blaming men. No blaming timing. It's just me. Choosing. Or not. Margaret's smile softened. There it is. They sat quietly for a while after that. When Rachel stood to leave, Margaret pulled her into a hug that was firm and steady. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she murmured. It's deciding something matters more. Rachel drove home with her windows down, letting the air tangle her hair and her thoughts. By the time she pulled into her apartment complex, she knew one thing with painful clarity. She couldn't keep standing still. That night, Richard called. She answered on the first ring. Hey, he said, sounding surprised and pleased. Hey, she replied. Are you busy? Not really. Can I come over? She asked. I owe you a conversation. There was a pause. Not hesitation, consideration. Okay, he said. I'm here. She arrived with her heart pounding hard enough to feel in her ears. When he opened the door, she took in the familiar lines of his face and saw something new there. Guarded hope. They sat at opposite ends of the couch this time. Space between them that felt deliberate. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Rachel began. I figured, he said gently. She took a breath. I've been afraid of losing you. His expression softened. You won't. I know, she said. And that's the problem. He waited. I've treated you like a constant, she continued. Like something that couldn't change. And that wasn't fair. He nodded slowly. I never expected anything from you. I know, she said, her voice thick. But that doesn't mean I didn't take advantage of it. Silence stretched. I don't know exactly what I want yet, she said finally. But I know I don't want to keep pretending you're just safe. His breath caught almost imperceptibly. Rachel, he said carefully. What are you asking me for? She met his eyes. Time, honesty, and the chance to figure out what this could be, if you still want that. He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I do. But I need to be clear about something. She braced herself. I can't be your fallback, he said. I can't be the place you rest while you decide if something better comes along. I don't want that, she said immediately. I don't want better. I want real. He held her gaze. Then we move forward. Together. Or we don't. Her heart thudded. Okay. It was the smallest word. The biggest risk. When she left that night, nothing had been resolved. But everything had been named. And for the first time, Rachel Mairin wasn't afraid of what might break. She was afraid of what might finally begin. Chapter 6. Richard gets a spine. Richard didn't sleep much after Rachel left that night. He lay awake on his couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it traced slow, useless circles, replaying the conversation with an intensity he hadn't allowed himself in years. Not because it was new, he'd lived with these feelings for most of his life, but because something had finally shifted. Rachel had named it. Not love. Not yet. But not safe anymore either. That mattered. For the first time, he wasn't quietly hoping. He was waiting for an answer he told himself he didn't need. And waiting had limits. The next week unfolded with a careful politeness that felt heavier than distance. They still talked, still texted, still shared small details of their days. But something essential had changed. Richard no longer filled the gaps automatically. When Rachel complained about a leaky faucet, he didn't immediately grab his tools. When she vented about a frustrating meeting, he listened, but didn't jump to problem solving. He was still kind, still attentive, but he wasn't orbiting anymore. Rachel noticed by Wednesday. It was subtle at first, like realizing a familiar background noise had gone quiet. She told herself she was imagining it, that she was just hyper-aware now. But by Friday she knew. She missed him. Not the constant presence she'd taken for granted, but the way he used to lean in. She called him that night. "Hey," she said when he answered. "What are you up to?" "Just got back from the gym," he replied. "What's up?" His voice was warm, neutral, not reaching. "I was thinking we could grab dinner," she said. "If you're free." There was a pause. Not long, just long enough. "I can," he said. "But I want to be honest with you before we do." Her stomach dipped. "Okay. I don't want to keep pretending nothing's different," he said. "And I don't want to slide back into being comfortable." The word landed with unexpected force. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "But I can't keep showing up like nothing's at stake." Rachel closed her eyes. "Dinner's fine," he added gently. "As long as we're both clear this isn't the same as before." She swallowed. "I understand." They met at a quiet bistro near his place. No candles, no soft music, just good food and too much honesty hovering between them. For a while they talked about neutral things, work, movies, a mutual friend's engagement. But the conversation kept circling back to the unspoken. Finally, Richard set his fork down. "I need to say something," he said. Rachel nodded, heart pounding. "I love you," he said. Not dramatically, not softly, just truthfully. "I always have. And I've been okay carrying that quietly because I thought it was better than risking losing you." Her breath caught. "But now," he continued, "I can't unknow that you're thinking about me differently. And I can't keep being the place you land while you decide if you want to jump." She met his eyes. "I don't want to hurt you." "I know," he said. "But intent doesn't change impact." Silence pressed in. "So here's my spine," he said with a small, rueful smile. "If you want to explore this with me, I'm all in. Slowly. Honestly. No games. And if I'm not ready?" she asked quietly. "Then I need to step back," he said. "Not punish you. Not disappear. Just stop living halfway." Her chest ached. This was it. The moment her grandmother had warned her about. The moment where choosing nothing was still a choice. She thought of Trevor. Of entitlement. Of noise. She thought of Richard. Steady, patient, now finally standing up for himself. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "That's new for me." She smiled weakly. "Of course it is." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away, but he didn't close the distance either. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "But I don't want to keep you in limbo." His shoulders eased slightly. "I want to try," she said. "Really try. Not as a safety net. Not as an experiment." His eyes searched her face. "What does that look like to you?" "It looks like dating," she said. "On purpose. With intention. And if it doesn't work, we'll be honest," he finished. "And kind." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay." Again, the smallest word. Still terrifying. They left the restaurant together, walking side by side but not touching. When they reached her car, she hesitated. "This is the part where we'd normally hug," she said. Richard smiled. "What do you want to do?" She took a breath and stepped closer. The hug was different. Not familiar. Not automatic. It lingered just long enough to matter. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. As Rachel drove home, her heart raced. Not with panic, but with something sharper and brighter. Richard had finally drawn a line. And instead of pushing her away, it had pulled her forward. Chapter 7, the most honest conversation. Dating Richard was nothing like Rachel expected. There were no fireworks, no dizzy highs, no frantic overthinking about whether she should wait exactly 12 minutes before responding to a text. There was just intention. They agreed to take it slow, which turned out to mean something radically unfamiliar. They talked about expectations, about fears, about what dating even meant when you already knew someone's favorite soup and the name of their childhood dog. Their first official date was a Saturday morning walk through the park. No dress, no heels, just coffee and early spring sunlight filtering through trees that hadn't fully decided to bloom yet. "This feels weird," Rachel said, breaking the silence after several minutes. Richard smiled. "Good weird or bad weird?" "Honest weird," she said. "Like we skipped the awkward parts and went straight to the scary ones." He nodded. "Yeah, that tracks." They walked a little farther before he spoke again. "I want to say something," he said, "and I don't want it to sound like pressure." She looked at him. "Okay. I don't expect this to work just because I want it to," he said. "I know feelings don't operate on loyalty points." She exhaled. Thank you for saying that. But, he continued, I do need to know that if we're doing this, you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop. Her chest tightened. I don't know how not to. He stopped walking. She stopped too, turning to face him. Rachel, he said gently, I've been your safe place for a long time, and I don't resent that. But if we're changing the shape of this, if we're dating, I need to be more than safe. She swallowed. What do you need me to be? He didn't answer right away. He looked at her like he was choosing his words carefully, like this mattered more than being smooth. I need you to choose me even when it's uncomfortable, he said. Even when it's easier to walk away than risk failing. The truth of it hit her square in the chest. I've been very good at leaving, she admitted. I know. I leave before things get hard, she said. Before I can be the one who messes it up. He studied her face. Do you think you'd mess this up? Yes, she said immediately. He smiled, not unkindly. Me too. She laughed despite herself. That's not comforting. It is to me, he said. Because it means we're both human. They resumed walking closer now. Not touching but aware. That night, Rachel lay in bed replaying the conversation. Not with anxiety, surprisingly, but with a strange, cautious hope. This wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't projection. This was two people choosing to be seen. The following weeks were a study in unlearning habits. Rachel caught herself reaching for sarcasm when she felt vulnerable, and stopped mid-sentence. She caught herself waiting for Richard to disappoint her, and felt ashamed of the instinct. Richard, for his part, was learning how to want something without apologizing for it. He was still kind, still attentive, but now he asked for what he needed instead of assuming his role was to accommodate. It came to a head one evening at her apartment. They'd cooked dinner together, nothing fancy, just pasta and a shared bottle of wine. They sat on the couch afterward, legs tucked under them. A movie paused halfway through because neither of them was watching it anymore. Richard set his glass down. Can we talk about something? He asked. Her heart jumped. Yes. I need to know where you are, he said. Not long-term plans. Just now. She took a breath. Okay. I don't need certainty, he continued. But I do need to know you're not bracing for impact. She stared at her hands. I've been waiting for the moment when this feels too good, she admitted. Because historically, that's when it falls apart. He nodded slowly. And does it feel too good? She looked up at him. Really looked. It feels steady, she said. Which somehow scares me more. His lips curved into a small smile. That's fair. I don't feel like I have to perform, she continued. Or defend myself. Or prove anything. Is that bad? He asked quietly. No, she said. It's just unfamiliar. She shifted closer, their knees touching now. The contact sent a quiet jolt through her. I think I've been confusing intensity with connection, she said. And drama with passion. Richard's gaze softened. And what does this feel like? She didn't answer immediately. It felt like standing at the edge of something deep and calm. Like stepping onto solid ground after years of unstable footing. It feels like trust, she said finally. And that terrifies me. He reached out then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. Trust goes both ways, he said. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. Tears pricked at her eyes, surprising her. I don't know how this ends, she said. Neither do I, he replied. But I know how it begins. She laughed softly. You always were better at beginnings than me. I've had a lot of time to think about this one, he said. She met his eyes. Richard, why did you wait? He considered the question. Because loving you never felt like a sacrifice, he said. Until it did. The honesty of it took her breath away. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm not, he said. It brought us here. She leaned into him then, resting her head against his shoulder. The gesture felt momentous in its simplicity. They didn't kiss that night. Not because they didn't want to, but because neither of them wanted to rush past the weight of what they were building. When he left, Rachel stood at the door long after it closed, her hand still resting where his had been. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't asking whether love was worth the risk. She was asking whether she was brave enough to keep choosing it. And the answer, quiet, steady, terrifying, was yes. Chapter 8 Risk is the point. The first kiss happened on a Tuesday. Not during a candlelit dinner or at the end of a perfectly planned date. Not accompanied by swelling music or a dramatic confession. It happened in Rachel's kitchen, with a pot of soup simmering too long on the stove and rain tapping insistently against the windows. They had fallen into a rhythm over the past few weeks, intentional, steady, quietly brave. Dates that were chosen, not defaulted to. Conversations that didn't dodge the hard parts. Touches that asked permission without words. Still, they hadn't crossed that particular line. Until they did. Rachel stood at the counter chopping carrots while Richard leaned against the opposite wall. Sleeves rolled up, watching her with a softness she felt more than saw. You're overthinking it, he said mildly. She snorted. I'm not overthinking. I'm considering. You've been considering the same carrot for 30 seconds. She glanced down. The carrot was aggressively uneven. Fine, she conceded. I'm nervous. About soup. No, she said. About us. He didn't joke. He straightened, giving her his full attention. Talk to me. She set the knife down carefully. Everything feels real. Not dramatic. Not loud. And that makes me want to check for traps. He nodded. I get that. I keep waiting for the moment where you change, she admitted. Where you get tired of being patient. Or decide I'm too much work. He crossed the kitchen slowly, stopping just close enough to matter. Rachel, he said quietly. I didn't wait this long because I'm patient. I waited because I was sure. Her throat tightened. And now I'm choosing, he said. Every day. Same as you. She searched his face for irony. Found none. I don't know how to do this without screwing it up, she whispered. He smiled gently. Then don't do it perfectly. Do it honestly. The rain picked up outside, drumming against the glass. She took a breath and stepped closer. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even particularly graceful. But when her hand came up to rest against his chest, when she felt the steady thrum of his heartbeat under her palm, something inside her settled. He didn't move, didn't assume. She tilted her head up. Richard, she said softly. Yes, I'm done waiting for certainty. His breath caught. Okay, he said. She closed the distance. The kiss was careful, almost shy, a question more than a declaration. His lips were warm, familiar in a way that surprised her, like her body had known this long before her mind caught up. When they pulled back, neither of them spoke for a moment. Well, he said finally, voice rough. That felt significant. She laughed, pressing her forehead to his. Understatement. They didn't rush after that. They turned off the stove. They ate soup that was slightly overcooked and didn't care. They sat close on the couch, knees touching, shoulders brushing, learning the shape of something new built from something old. Later, when Richard walked her to the door, as he still insisted on doing even though she lived alone and could handle herself, she hesitated. I keep thinking about my grandparents, she said. He smiled. That explains a lot. They make it look so simple, she said. But I'm starting to realize it's not that it was easy. It's that they kept choosing each other. He nodded. That's the part people forget. She looked up at him. I want that. Not the illusion. The work. His expression softened into something profound and almost reverent. So do I. In the weeks that followed, reality tested them. Not with dramatic betrayals or sudden revelations, but with the quiet friction of two people learning to share space differently. Rachel had to unlearn the instinct to withdraw when she felt overwhelmed. Richard had to learn that her silence wasn't rejection, it was processing. They argued once about something small and stupid, whether it was too soon to plan a weekend trip together. The disagreement was awkward, uncomfortable, and, miraculously, resolved without anyone storming out or shutting down. Afterward, Rachel sat on her couch, stunned. That's it? She asked. Richard blinked. That's what? We talked. We disagreed. And nobody left. He smiled. Low bar, but yes. She laughed, then grew serious. I would have ended things over that before. I know, he said gently. You don't have to anymore. The realization hit her like a wave. This steady, sometimes uncomfortable, deeply human thing was what she'd been looking for. Not perfection. Commitment. One evening, a month in, they found themselves back at her grandparents' house for dinner. Henry watched them over his plate with open satisfaction. Well, he said finally, it's about damn time. Rachel rolled her eyes. You're impossible. And right, he replied cheerfully. Margaret caught Rachel's eye and smiled. Later, as Richard helped Henry carry dishes to the kitchen, Margaret leaned in. You look lighter, she murmured. Rachel nodded. I feel braver. Margaret squeezed her hand. Good. Love rewards courage. That night, as Rachel lay in bed replaying the day, she realized something else, something quiet and profound. She wasn't afraid of losing Richard anymore. She was invested. And for the first time, the risk didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like the point. Chapter 9, The Long View. The first time Rachel realized she was thinking in we instead of I, it startled her. She was standing in the grocery store, staring at 2 brands of pasta sauce, when the thought surfaced unannounced. Richard prefers the one with less sugar. She paused, jar in hand. It wasn't the thought itself that unsettled her. It was how natural it felt. No resistance, no mental negotiation, just quiet consideration. She smiled to herself and put the jar in the cart. This, she was learning, was what commitment looked like when it wasn't dramatic, when it didn't demand sacrifice so much as attention. Richard noticed the change too. You're quieter, he said one evening as they walked through her neighborhood. Hands brushing occasionally but not always holding. Am I? She asked. Not withdrawn, he clarified. Settled. She considered that. I think I'm finally letting myself plan past the next exit. He smiled. Good. I was getting tired of driving alone. They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. When it changed, she reached for his hand without thinking. He squeezed back. It had been 3 months since they'd started dating on purpose. 3 months of choosing, recalibrating, occasionally stumbling and always circling back to honesty. They weren't perfect. Rachel still had moments where fear flared unexpectedly, when a disagreement lingered too long, when Richard went quiet because he was tired instead of because he was upset, when happiness felt so complete it triggered suspicion. But the difference now was that she didn't run. She talked, and Richard met her there every time. The true test came quietly. It arrived in the form of a job offer. Richard told her on a Sunday afternoon, sitting at her kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. "They want me to lead the expansion," he said. "It's a good opportunity." Her stomach tightened. Where? 2 hours away. There it was. The old Rachel would have smiled, congratulated him, and begun emotionally packing her bags. Distance was a reason. Clean one. A respectable one. She inhaled slowly. "When would you go?" she asked. "In 6 months, he said. "Nothing's decided. I haven't said yes." Her pulse steadied. "What do you want?" He watched her carefully. "I want to take it, and I want us to talk about what that means. No assumptions. No martyrdom." She nodded. "Okay." They talked for hours. About logistics. About fears. About what neither of them wanted to repeat from past relationships. His habit of shrinking himself, her instinct to disappear. At one point, Rachel laughed, pressing her palms to her face. "This is so unfair." "What is?" he asked. "That you're handling this like an adult," she said. "It's really ruining my ability to catastrophize." He grinned. "I've been working on my timing." When the conversation ended, nothing was resolved, but nothing was broken either. And for the first time, uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. Felt like a shared problem. The following weekend, they went to her grandparents' house for dinner again. Henry watched them from his recliner as they moved around the kitchen together, bumping shoulders, exchanging quiet looks. "Well," he said loudly, "I see the boy finally got a clue." Richard laughed. "You don't miss much, do you, sir?" "Not when it matters," Henry replied. After dinner, as the sun dipped low and Margaret cleared the table with gentle efficiency, Rachel stepped out onto the porch alone. The air was warm, carrying the scent of cut grass and familiarity. Margaret joined her a moment later, draping a light cardigan around her shoulders. "You seem peaceful," she observed. Rachel smiled. "I am." Margaret studied her face. "Tell me what you've learned." Rachel leaned against the railing, considering. "I learned that love doesn't need to be loud to be deep," she said. "And that consistency isn't boring. It's generous." Margaret nodded. "And about yourself?" Rachel hesitated, then smiled, rueful and proud all at once. "I learned that I wasn't afraid of being alone," she said. "I was afraid of being seen and staying." Margaret's eyes softened. "And now I'm staying." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Good. That's how it lasts." Later that night, back at Rachel's apartment, Richard stood by the door, keys in hand. "You were quiet on the drive home," he said. "I was thinking," she admitted. "Dangerous pastime." She laughed, then grew serious. "About your job offer." He nodded. "Me too." She took a breath. "I don't know what the answer is yet." "That's okay," he said. "Neither do I. But I do know this," she continued. "I'm not walking away just because it's complicated." Something eased in his expression. "Thank you." "I'm choosing you," she said. "Not certainty. Not convenience. You." He stepped closer, resting his forehead against hers. "I choose you too," he said. "Every version. Even the scared one." She smiled, eyes burning. "Especially that one." They kissed then, not careful, not hesitant. Familiar and new all at once. The kind of kiss built on trust instead of urgency. When he left, Rachel stood in the quiet of her apartment and felt something she'd never allowed herself before. Contentment without vigilance. She thought of the woman she'd been at the beginning. Successful, exhausted. Convinced that love was something she had to defend herself against. She wasn't that woman anymore. She was someone who stayed. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Rachel sat at her grandparents' kitchen table again, this time with Richard beside her, his hand resting easily over hers. Henry raised his glass. "To the obvious thing," he said. Rachel laughed, shaking her head. "You're unbearable." "And correct," he replied. She looked at Richard, steady, imperfect, choosing her right back, and finally understood what her grandparents had been modeling all along. Love wasn't a lightning strike. It was a long view, and Rachel Mairin was no longer afraid to take it.